Wait. Okay. Can you see my slides? You see them?
Yeah, we do.
Good, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for organizing this series on attention, and thank you for inviting me over. After studying the cell phone, I became interested in attention and imagination. And I feel that these two kind of qualities, human functions, call them whatever you like, they are being transformed by cell phones. And more recently, we see that with the AI, but I will not touch upon AI today. I just want to think with you what is happening with the notion of attention. And I would like to provide a kind of genealogy of attention and show that it's not one thing, something that remains stable for centuries. It's something that is stable, that is changing. And I will try to end up with some kind of ethical recommendations in a sense. So without further ado, let's start. I'd like to start my discussion on attention with St. Augustine. I think that much of our understanding of attention is rooted back then, almost 2,000 years ago, with thinking of attention as a kind of focusing. Attention is focusing for most people. It seems like synonyms even. And it is a very funny moment to think of St. Augustine coming to Milan, going to visit St. Ambrose. And St. Ambrose is busy. And not only busy, all his attention is directed towards a book. Of course, it's a holy book with but it's a moment that St. Ambrose is focused on that reading. He doesn't notice that St. Augustine entered the room. And St. Augustine is really impressed first from this ability to be so focused on the book. And then on this mode of silent reading, everything is very silent. And this is something that St. Augustine is really impressed from. No wonder then that most libraries until the 21st centuries were like this, with quiet rooms, and you could focus, you should have focused just on reading one book at a time, and focus, very silent. And it also kind of developed into other areas. This is one of my favorite images. It's Ferdinand Knopf, end of 19th century, and in a minute I will return to this moment of late 19th century. And Ferdinand Knopf in Brussels in a museum of Fin de Siècle. And it's a woman listening to Schumann. That's the name of this work of art. And as you can see, she doesn't want to see anything. She's closing her eyes and she's just listening to the music. And we know that she's listening to the music because on the left corner, you see the hand of the pianists playing the piano. And she's very focused on that. She doesn't do anything else. She's just listening to the music. All her attention is on Schumann's music. My starting point, my real starting point of my study is Jonathan Crary's book, highly recommended, Suspensions of Perception, Attention, Spectacle, and Modern Culture, where he's trying to identify the birth of modern attention in the last quarter of the 19th century. And he's arguing that until mid-19th century, attention was something positive or at max neutral. But then he said attention somehow shifted from kind of an object of research to a field of research of its own with its own unique questions, such as how does attention filter the perception? Can attention be operated by will, or is it automatic? Or how many aspects of the world can be perceived at the same time? And to the last question, the answer remains with St. Augustine: one, just one. To be effective, it has to be one and only one. As you can see from the book cover, it's the time of the moving image, and the moving image is starting to develop, and the cinema, out of all things, is invented in the last quarter of the 19th century. And the cinema, for me, is the biggest attention machine, because in the cinema, from its very beginning, you had to sit in a dark room, you shouldn't do anything, and all your attention is focused to this bright square lightened in front of you. That's why we do now presentations in our classrooms. That's why Zoom is so successful. We all look at the same very bright box, look at it, and this is the focus of our attention, or at least should be, so we think. That was the ideal of the 19th century. But in the 20th century, some technologies came and kind of disrupted this ideal. And if you could think of the early radios with this dial through which you go across the spectrum, and you could hear this, and then you would arrive to a station. And this is a focusing, but it's a different mode of focusing. Later on in the 80s, we see the emergence of a multi-channel TV, and you just click, you don't hear the in between, you just switch between the stations, and your attention functions as a spotlight. Now, the idea of a spotlight, the metaphor of the spotlight, is not something new. I spotted it as back as Husserl and even Dewey, in a sense. Husserl is speaking of the turn of the gaze. And for him, attention is a kind of a ray of light. This is where the spotlight image came from. And all of a sudden, this distinction between a foreground and background that was very visible with, let's say, with St. Augustine, all of a sudden it becomes meaningless, because you just have to switch between the various foci. Merleau-Ponty was really critical about this spotlight metaphor. He didn't like it. He said that it assumes that the object already exists. It's just in a standby mode in the dark, waiting to be discovered. And with the spotlight, all objects are revealed in the same way. They all gain the same amount of light, the same color of light, the same perspective, and they are revealed similarly. Whereas in reality, he said, it doesn't happen. The object, they don't exist in advance, and they are not revealed in the same manner over and over again. Moreover, he doesn't like the spotlight metaphor because it means that you move quickly from one object of attention to another. And like 30 years later on, people, when they are thinking of the internet, thinking about how people are moving from one website to the other, boof, all of a sudden again, this criticism is getting back to work against the internet. Of course, he said that every visit would yield new results, and therefore attention is something that is much more productive. It's not something that is passive in a sense. And so he says, attention, first of all, presupposes a transformation of the mental field, a new way for consciousness to be present to its objects. And he continues, the first operation of attention is to create for itself a field, either perceptual or mental, which can be surveyed, in which movement of the exploratory organ or elaborations of thought are possible. But this kind of movement of the exploratory organ reminds me again of the spotlight. Maybe it's slightly different spotlight, but it's still a spotlight. Think of the radio, how you move the dial between the various stations, and it's just this movement. So, okay, it's not the same light everywhere. It's not, it doesn't reveal in the same way, but the very basic operation of thinking of attention as a spotlight remains there. For Merleau-Ponty, it's so difficult to come up with a new idea of attention and how it operates. And I'd like to devote the rest of my discussion to 21st century, what I called multi-attention. When I worked on my book on cell phones, I found myself in a debate with my good friend, Robert Rosenberger. He thought that driving while selling, while talking on the cell phone is very dangerous because the attention is being directed from the driving to talking on the phone. And I thought that it's something that happens to us every day. If you have kids and you have to take care of them, especially young kids, you have to split your attention. So I thought, now I'm not talking in terms of splitting, but rather in terms of multi-attention, that our attention is multiplying itself. From my work experience, my attention was always multiple. I always had to take care of more than one thing at a time. And the more I think of multi-attention, the more I see it. For example, on the left side, you can see a picture from IKEA's catalog. And there you don't see one spotlight, you see 3 spotlights, and sometimes even more. That depends on the image. But there are multiple spotlights, not just one. And when you see the news are not just one bright box. All of a sudden you have the news itself, but then on the lower part, some headlines that are running. And as you can see here in the background, there are so many additional images. Or if you look at a surveillance camera, the output is usually with not just one box. You have 12, 20 boxes, and you see them all. You see them all at the same time. Yes, you can focus on one of them if you'd like. But the first impression, hey, I have all these images, and they're all there. We all see them. And all of a sudden, stories like the one on Elvis Presley, who had at his home a TV room with 3 TV screens, one next to the other, one for each channel. There were, ABC, CBS, NBC. For each one, he had its own television, and they all operated at the same time. And people thought, wow, that's impossible. You can't look at them. Why was he doing it? And today we understand that it is possible. You can look at one, but at the corner of your eyes, you can see the others as well. So with my cell phone study, I thought, well, driving is not just looking at the dashboard and operating the car and looking at the road. It also involves navigation. I have to think where I'm going to. And then I would like to see a bit of the landscape. It doesn't it doesn't consume too much of my attention, but I can still see it. I can still enjoy it. Sometimes I have passengers in the car. Some of them are pleasant, and some, just think of that obnoxious relative that you have, and driving with that relative in your car. So you're still driving, right? And you're still aware of the traffic around you, and you can still navigate. You can listen to the radio if you'd like. And now, on top of all these, we have the cell phone. And somehow it is blamed for all the things that went wrong with the others. But nobody would say, don't put radios in cars. Nobody would say, don't drive obnoxious relatives, or don't drive your kids when they are fighting in the back. We don't say that. Yeah, we drive with kids fighting in the back. We look at beautiful landscapes, and nobody has to put huge fences so that we don't see the landscapes. just for those who are concerned that it's too dangerous, this is a nice research done by behavioral economists. They were taking data in the US from the days that the cell phone just entered the market. And they showed, you can see the red line shows cellular ownership that is going up, and fatal crashes and all crashes are going down. Now, all kinds of other variables, such as the road conditions and safety instruments in the car, they were all being neutralized. A very interesting research. So what is this attention that I'm talking about? While working on my concept of multi-attention, after some years, I realized I published my first article in 2014. 3 years later, Sebastian Watzel publishes like 3 articles on the topic. And for him, attention is degrees of attention. So we have various degrees of attention that we can assign to different, let's call them things for the moment. So his 2 examples, I think that they are striking. One of them is listening to a jazz band. And I can concentrate, let's say, on the saxophone or the piano, but I can still hear the drums. I still hear them. Although I'm concentrating, I'm focused on one of the instruments, I can still hear the others. Or if you're commuting and you, let's say, read a newspaper, read your emails, you know when you have to go to get off the bus or train. You just know it. And you know who more or less is around you. You know that there are a certain amount of people. You know whether it's crowded or not. These things are there and we know them. And it's a matter of our attention to think of it in a different way. So it's a matter of assigning different attentions, different levels of attention to different objects around us. It's very different from the spotlight, which assumes that you can pay attention only to one thing at a time. How am I with the time?
I think you have still some time.
Okay. I'll try to wrap up, to leave time for the discussion. I really want to hear your input on that. So in a sense, multi-attention for me is a kind of a subversive response. Whereas the attention economy assumes this spotlight metaphor. And that's why once in a while we get this ad that takes over the screen just to make sure that we pay attention to it. And I don't know what about you, but I just leave my phone or my browser, I leave them aside and I come back after a minute when it finishes, if I can't just cut it as it is. So for the attention economy, attention is what I see. That's why eye trackers became so popular in research. Now, eye trackers, it's so 20th century. It's so much about spotlight. It's as if what I see is what I think about, as if I can't think of something different while I see something, as if my brain has to just focus on one thing. So attention is there is still equivalent to the focusing, and it is still part of this thinking of attention as a problem of distraction. Jonathan Crary devotes his book to this way of thinking of attention. But my suggestion would be different. And instead of fighting the attention economy by focusing more, by not paying attention, I say, let's split, and do as much splitting as we can. So that advertisers will get this impression of our attention, but they will get only a very tiny part of it, only a slice of it. And therefore, maybe instead of speaking of splitting the attention, maybe we should speak of attentions. And here I'm inspired by Donna Haraway, who speaks of knowledges. And it's the same way of thinking. Why having only one knowledge? Why having only one attention if I can have a multiplicity of them? and then playing with them and getting out of them the maximum for me. And that's why I call this kind of a subversive response to the attention economy. Let them think whatever they would like to think, but I'm protecting myself. And with this subversive response, I'm kind of taking the rugs below their feet, below the advertiser's feet. So to sum, what I showed here today very briefly is 3 modes of attention. The first one is the focusing, rooted as back as I could put to St. Augustine, with having my object of attention in the foreground and all the rest of the world is in the background unnoticed. I don't notice anything, just this, I'm attentive only to one thing, which is in the foreground. And the foreground can accommodate only one object. Then we move to the spotlight, and all of a sudden there are several objects, but I'm moving between them. I'm switching my attention very fast. And some of the critiques are saying it's too fast. We can't move our attention so fast. And against that, I was conducting a research with elderly adults, and I was training them to split their visual attention with a computer game named Fruit Ninja. The results, it was for a too short period, so we didn't get good enough results, but it showed some promise in a sense. There were some
human cognitive function like decline massively.
Sorry?
I think it was by accident, and I think you can continue.
Okay. And lastly, with the multi-attention, I would like to think of our attention as something that enables us to notice more than a single object at a certain point in time and assign to the object various parts of my attentions, various attentions to various parts. Because I'm a philosopher of technology, I'm practicing post-phenomenology, I'd like to think of these attentions as something that is co-shaped with certain technologies. And the focusing, I see it in a dramatic way with books and libraries, with a gramophone, if you remember the listening to Schumann, and the cinema as the biggest attention machine that I could think of. The spotlight is, as I mentioned, it is inspired by the radio, by multi-channel TV, and later on by the internet itself. But the multi-attention is something that we see with the smartphones. I guess most of you, your phones are by now dual core, quad core, meaning that they have like 2 or 4 CPUs that are processing the information in parallel. In our brain, it turned out that we have several networks of attention, and they work in parallel, these networks. So I'd like to thank you all for your multi-attentions. Some of you practiced it more than the others. These are some of my publications in this area, and I would really love to hear your critical and constructive comments. Thank you so much.